Hi, and welcome to the Boat Princess podcast. My name is Nikki Vo, and I'm your host. I am a boat owner, a marinas owner, an international conference presenter, and a huge advocate for boating. I'm sharing the stories from every nook of the boating industry with the intention of encouraging more women to join me and for more women to get behind the helm too. I want to share the experience and opportunities of boating, of the boating industry, and I want you to join me as I bring the conversations and answer all the questions you've had. Boating is not just for the glamorous and rich and famous. It's full of beautiful and interesting people making the most of our natural environment and getting out there, enjoying the waterways. So, let's set off the lines, take over the helm, and escape to the world of boating. Hi everyone, and welcome to the Boat Princess podcast. I've got a really exciting one for you today, and I think this is going to turn out to be 2 episodes because this guy is seriously interesting. I have Jasper Smith, co-owner of Arksen, in front of me. Welcome, Jasper, to the podcast.
Oh, thank you so much for having us. It's great to be here. Really lovely to meet you. And congratulations on what you've built so far with this.
Oh, thank you. No, I truly love doing this. It's so much fun because I get to interview really interesting people like you.
Oh dear. Oh, I hope do I live up to that?
Oh, no. I've done a little bit of research on you and you're going to be fascinating. So let's start with, you clearly have a very strong value of family. Mm-hmm. And your dad, I think, has been a big influence on you. Mm. In your world. Tell me a little bit about that for you.
I think it's an ephemeral thing for me. You know, I lost my mother very early. And so my relationship with my father was extraordinarily tight. And he's 94 now. So he's sort of, his spirit of adventure even now, it surpasses mine. And I just think there's something magical in that sort of spiritual drive he has to, discover things, look at things. And so that's just rubbed off on me. And so I think with my children and my partner, family is sort of everything for us. It sort of feels, like you see these films with sort of big Italian families and they all get together. I always looked at those, there was this wonderful film called The Big Night years ago where they sort of cooked all this extraordinary food. And so, to me, family is just a complete celebration of what life's about. And if you add adventure on top of that, it's really sort of, spiritually and sort of emotionally rewarding. So that's, really at the core of who I am.
Yeah. And you've done a fantastic video online, the Spirit of Adventure video featuring your dad in his 90s. Just incredible. Now, how did that come about and why did that come about for you?
So he had a stroke and so he was extremely lucky, but he was driving a car, had a stroke, drove into a hospital and they said, we can't treat you here. It was crazy. So long story short, he sort of lost the ability to walk and talk and drive and do all those things. And as he was recovering, I always remembered how much he loved driving. So I said, well, let's go to Africa and we'll take one of our Land Rovers and sort of drive across the Tanqueray National Park and go and do this stuff. And so for him, it was a target. And we took the whole family out. We arrived, got dysentery, and then spent a week just driving through, like completely off grid with him. And he drove, and it was magical. And we extended the trip, stayed a little bit longer, and it's just wonderful to sort of take somebody who, has a sort of a defined lifestyle. Gets up in the morning, does this, that, and the other. Take them completely out of that sort of routine, plonk them in a Land Rover in the middle of nowhere, and say, here's the key, off you go. Particularly somebody that age, because they become like a child again. They're just like, let's go. So there was something very magical about doing it. and we made a small film.
And those memories will be with you and your children forever of doing that with him, which is incredibly, I think that's the most important part of outdoor adventures, especially because we're so focused when we're on an outdoor adventure, aren't we? And that keeps us in the realm of that wonderfulness, and we remember it for a very, very long time, don't we?
Yeah, I think there's something, there's a philosophy around play, the culture of play. And when we play, we're sort of our most free-ranging and our most competitive and our most sort of creative. And I look at adventure as this sense of play. It's sort of what's over there. How do we climb this? And the element of risk added to the sort of the ability to work with someone to achieve something it just feels great to me. I think there's a lot to learn from adventure for all of us. So
that's the basis of Arksen, which we're going to talk about later, because I really want to get into Arksen because it's an incredible concept, an incredible company. But I want to go back a bit first and understand you a little bit more, because you've mentioned the word play there. A lot of your career has involved some really fun moments. I mean, there's words in your LinkedIn such as fantastic corporation. And it's like, wow, what a great company name. So give us a little synopsis of your previous career and the things that you've really enjoyed doing.
Yeah, I was, typically unemployable, I think is probably best characterizes me. And so I started off trying to be a sculptor, and I was a lousy sculptor, but I was a great welder. So I ended up fixing cars and things. I was very, very lucky. And I met the guy that Rupert Murdoch had hired to set Sky up in the UK.
Okay.
Just because he had a load of classic cars. And he said, could you weld these cars for me? Which I did. And he was sort of impressed by my welding, I guess, and said, could you come and help me at Sky? And so I was the second or third person through the door at Sky.
Fantastic.
And what happens with those sorts of things is these organizations move so quickly. It's not based on CV. It's just based on skill set.
Yeah. And trust.
And trust, yeah. And so I ended up being, elevated way above my station at a young age. And then I just, carried on, and I think what happens is you get a reputation in industry for being somebody who can do something. So I ended up setting up a business in Switzerland called the Fantastic Corporation, which was a early data broadcasting company. And then we set up a business called the Optimistic,
Yes,
which was
a
media and production company that we listed, and set up a company called PlayJam, which was a games business. And we were very lucky with PlayJam in that we grew it from scratch to being, a much larger business. It ended up being actually the largest games network in the world by numbers.
Right.
And this is pre-mobile, right? So it was bigger than Xbox, bigger than PlayStation, and it provided terrible games, but to millions and millions of households through TV.
Yeah.
And so we were very lucky with that. We sold that, and that was the defining moment for me. I sold a business when I was quite young, and then I've spent the last sort of 30 years either investing into companies or incubating them and then building them. And that's really the genesis of Arksen. It's sort of come out of that venture building entrepreneurial streak that exists within many of us. Right?
Yeah. So that was literally a game changer for you, wasn't it?
Yeah, for sure. It was. I remember doing this deal, and we walked across Waterloo Bridge. Came out of the lawyer's office, walked across Waterloo Bridge about 3 a.m. just after signing this deal. And it's an extraordinary feeling of grief when you sell something that you've worked so hard to build.
Yeah.
Because your ambition for whatever you build is always enormous. Well, not always, but in this case, it was enormous.
Yeah.
And whilst we sold for a life-changing amount of capital, the grief is like, I've lost my child.
Yes.
So it was interesting. In retrospect, it was the best deal we ever did because the recession came. 2001, life ended for pretty much all .com. So in retrospect, it was a genius deal.
So great timing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Lucky.
Yeah. Well, the timing is lucky, isn't it? The work that's got into something like that is massive. Yeah. So that's not lucky. But the timing can be lucky on those sorts of things.
But I think luck is such a big part in business. You can be brilliant, you can be Google-esque, right? But for every Google, there are 10 lookalikes that just, or 100 lookalikes that don't get there. So, success comes about through sort of, remorseless focus and a tremendous amount of good luck. Yeah. And, you need both of those things. And certainly our exit was very lucky.
Yeah. Okay. So you've exited that, you've had a liquidity moment in your life, and you're ready there with some funds to move on to something different. What happened then?
So what tends to happen when you sell a business and you are suddenly in funds, you have no no support structure around you to deal with having cash. And so I was like a lot of people who were lucky enough to sort of make some money when they were quite young.
How old were you then?
I was about 25.
Wow, that is young. Okay,
25, 26 maybe.
Yeah.
So, I was quite young, so I wasn't really prepared for what happens. And what does happen is you just get bombarded by people saying, "Can I have some money? Can you do this? Can I do it? Hey, let's do this together. That would be great." And entrepreneurs, people like me, are awful at saying no. And so I said yes to everything. And it was sort of like Spider-Man with money. It was just this web of cash going out to all these different things. And so I realized pretty soon that wasn't going to work. And so then we set up a VC and a family office that sort of deployed some of our money, but then started running other people's money. So we built a VC. We
just explain to the listeners what a VC is.
A venture capital company. Yeah. And the idea with that venture capital company initially was just deploy capital in as an effective way as possible into startups, because that's the sort of area that we knew well. And then gradually that morphed into trying to deploy capital responsibly, ethically, trying to look at the sort of, the provenance of the businesses, the provenance of the founders, the ambition of those founders, the type of company, the ambition of the objective of that company. And could you create an investment thesis that looked at final outcomes being, more important than just cash returns.
Okay.
And that's a complex journey for a venture capital company to go on.
Yeah.
Because you're constantly measured as a venture capitalist on absolute returns.
Yes.
So that meant we had to put all our own money at risk and not take anybody else's money. So it's quite a brave move, and I think that will pay off. We've had some pretty good exits, but capital has to be responsible. And there's no, given where the world is today, there's no alternative to capital having absolute purpose behind it. And if it doesn't have purpose behind it, we're just wasting everybody's time. We're just carrying on with the sort of status quo. And I think anybody who's got any, nous understands that the status quo just ends in, cataclysmic disaster in one form or another. And obviously a lot of people make money out of that, but realistically what you need is a financial sector that's motivated to fund change. And I guess that's what we're all after, is behavioral change in one form or another. And the marine industry is extraordinary because it offers the opportunity for significant behavioral change quite quickly. It's one of the slowest industries to move in a sense, which means that it's got probably one of the biggest opportunities.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
So, all right. So you've got real solid values going on here. And then you've decided to go into creating Arksen. Now, Arksen has several different parts to it, doesn't it? Which part started first?
So we started with, we're a marine business first and foremost. And so we started with marine, and that's really we're an ocean first business. And, whilst we sort of, I guess at our core, at our most sort of basic, we're an engineering and design company, and we make these, what we think are these awesome hopefully iconic products that are designed really to, enable you to go off on the greatest of adventures that you can go off. But fundamentally, the purpose of the business is really about trying to democratize access to the ocean and trying to ensure that, every human being understands that without a healthy ocean, there is no healthy human. And that's extraordinary to me, that the ocean is so under-celebrated. And if, you were, I think, talking about Ocean Talks yesterday, and, there are these initiatives that are awesome, but they communicate to very small groups of people. And so you end up being in a little sandbox and we're all saying the same thing to each other. But the reality is, the global ocean today receives, less than 0.3% of all philanthropic giving globally. SDG 14 is the least funded of all SDGs, not by a small amount, but by a country mile. And the funding deficit for successful transition into healthy oceans is staggeringly big. So the only way of solving that is to try and create campaigns, if you like, that celebrate and worship the ocean, and try and communicate the fundamental flaws of that funding. It's nice to see the horses.
I know. Just to explain, guys, we're sitting at the Royal Thames Yacht Club, and it's right next to the King's Guard. So basically, the King's Guard sort of just potters past every now and then.
It's quite surreal.
Which is quite lovely.
It's quite beautiful. Yeah.
It's when they all come past in their full uniform. It's just glorious. Yeah. So rather a good spot. So, I mean, there's some deep-seated thoughts here, and I know Jacques Cousteau is a massive inspiration for you. Have these values that you have about the ocean and so on, have they come from seeing his documentaries as a child, or where has that intrinsic, real value for you about the ocean come from? Yeah,
I mean, absolutely. Seeing Jacques Cousteau on Calypso, and that was always like, I'd love to do that. That's a real ambition. And he was quite a complex character, right?
Yeah.
I mean, look, we're all complex characters, but he was quite a complex character. But I think his tenacity and his desire to make films that sort of educated people around the wonders in the ocean was phenomenal. He was one of a kind in that respect. But I grew up on a barge, Thames sailing barge, like a mile from here.
Okay.
And we lived just around the corner for 20 years or so. So I was sort of always around the river, always around these boats. Our boat sunk in the end, so we had to move on. But and then I was very lucky. When I was quite young, I was given the opportunity to be the first mate on a sailing boat that sailed around the world. So we started in the UK and then sailed up to the Faroes and then Iceland, and then across to Greenland, then back to the UK. And eventually that boat went all the way down to Sydney. And then I took it from Sydney up to Alaska. So it was just like really wonderful experiences. And so I had these I always had this, passion for water. And I think there's something quite extraordinary that you find when you're at sea, way offshore, and the light, the way the ocean, the sea state of the ocean, and just the calmness that you find even even when everything's going wrong, you find you find yourself, I think. And there's it's very hard to do that, I think, in most places at the moment. Life has sort of disassociated ourselves from the environment to many degrees through phones and social media and stuff like that. So there's something very honest about being at sea, I think.
I think it's the ultimate freedom.
Yeah.
You look out into that ocean and there is literally nothing there, and it's such a good feeling, isn't it?
Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. It's just there's nothing like it. And you occasionally find extraordinary. You do find extraordinary experiences when you're hiking or climbing or doing those things. So it's not that the ocean is, the only wilderness that we've got left. It's certainly the biggest wilderness we've got left. But I think there is that extraordinary feeling of aloneness, and it's just me in this little floaty thing, and
you suddenly feel so insignificant as well, don't you? You feel, well, I'm tiny, and this is incredible.
So I had this experience of sailing across the Mariana Trench, and that was really interesting. It's like I could drop Everest below the keel, and I can look up and see, the infinite galaxy above me, and we're like, a few hundred miles offshore or something like that. So there's, it's really interesting, that 3-dimensional sort of window that you can look through when you're at sea.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So what sort of boat was that you sailed around the world on?
That was a Ron Holland 55-foot ketch.
Oh, nice.
Which was aluminium, which is where my love for aluminium came from.
Okay.
And she was called Ardevra of Roseland, and it should be a beautiful boat. She had one flaw, which was that she had a swing keel, she had a lifting keel, and it wasn't so much a flaw as a lack of maintenance on our part, I think, which it had a wonky bush. So the keel would just clunk, 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 clunk. So we went all the way around the Pacific, driving ourselves slightly nuts. But
didn't have a couple of bits of cork.
Yeah, that's what we should have done. Yeah. It would have been a 10-minute fix, I'm sure.
Oh, that sounds amazing. So when did that trip finish?
That trip finished, I think, in probably about 89, something like that. Yeah. So we sailed into Kamchatka. We were the first sort of Western yacht sailing to Kamchatka, and it was right at the time of Perestroika, and so communism was collapsing, and it was an extraordinary time. I mean, it was all of the Northern Fleet, all of the icebreakers and things were sat in Petropavlos Harbour, just sinking into the harbour. So with these huge rusting hulks, and the shops had nothing, so you would look at these big glass cabinets, display cabinets, and there would be a single plug or something. That was the entire, items, the entire range of product for sale was like one plug.
Wow.
So it's quite extraordinary, and we met some amazing people, and went skiing with the Extreme Ski Club of Kamchatka for a couple of weeks, and we stayed there, I think, about a couple of months or something. An amazing place. It's tragic what's happened, with Ukraine and Russia. Really, I mean, it's devastating how Putin has gathered so much power and created such havoc there. But fundamentally, my memories of Russia are so. It was such a life-changing place to go. It was quite an amazing experience.
Yeah. Have you followed me on LinkedIn as Nikki Vo, the Boat Princess? I'll be posting details on what's going on in the boating industry, and you can also connect with me if you'd like to be a guest on the podcast and share your business story. So, it's amazing. So your fundamental love of adventure has come from some serious experience. You've done some incredible things and seen some incredible places. So then Arksen, obviously for you, is I guess it's a way of you wanting to share that life, right?
Yeah. I mean, I spent the early part of my life doing sort of, writing ones and zeros and software code, and there's a beauty in that, because you can write something that you think is more or less perfect, and then you can just put it in a box, and it sort of, you never see it again. But there's something quite lovely about that journey. It was quite a cathartic thing. But my love of sculpture was where my heart's always been, and metalwork and banging things around. And so I always thought, inspired by the journeys I had done previously, that I would love to build a business that was sculptural in form, and created these extraordinary machines that enabled you to go off on wonderful adventures. And it's always been, how do you create product that is, designed to do the job? And so I think quite often our experience as a family of owning boats is that a lot of boats are built for a couple of weeks use a year. So the engineering map is 52 hours, 100 hours a year. The rest of the time we'll be stuck in a marina. And, as an owner, that's sort of, that it just doesn't work for me. Essentially what I set out to do was try and create a boat that was designed for always on usage, built to fully commercial standards, that was a sort of a leisure, built around a leisure platform. And it, the ambition behind that, the statement of intent, if you like, was that those vessels could be used, almost always, to be able to go off and do research and filmmaking and conservation work and things like that, as well as setting off on these extraordinary adventures.
Okay.
And so it was a sort of slightly different set of parameters. So rather than building to a budget, it was building to an ambition. And that meant that in these boats, there's extraordinary levels of redundancy and robustness that, I think is pretty unusual in the industry.
Yeah, notice you even have a backup steering system. I mean, fantastic.
Yeah, it's got a lot. Yeah. It's got, I think, there's between 1 and 4 times redundancy across every critical system.
Yeah,
so it's sort of, it's an insane, it's like an engineer's wet dream. It is mad.
Yeah.
And some people love that.
Yeah.
Some people, look at it and go, well, actually, I'm never going to use it. So why pay for it?
Yeah.
But what it does mean is you've got a vessel that's designed, as I've said a couple of times, for always on usage. So, you can run these vessels, subject to maintenance, you can run these vessels pretty much like you would run a commercial ferry.
Yeah.
And that's got to be the ambition, I think, for every owner, is that, boats are used, right? They're not sat in marinas. And it's astounding to me that we spend, we'll buy a super yacht, we'll have 6-7 crew plus, and they spend 80% of the time cleaning it. And so that it looks good in the marina. And to me, it's like, I don't really care what the boat looks like in a marina. What I want is a great boat that I know that if I'm diving from it or free diving from it, or, we're doing some research project or we're filming with it, it is really, really capable. Mm. And I don't really care that it, whether all the windows are sparkling or, and things like that. So I think there's a zeitgeist at the moment as cultures move. We've got the horses back.
Yeah. Look, they're in full dress now. Look at that. Don't they look fabulous? Sorry, I'm so sorry you can't see this, guys, because it's quite spectacular.
That is stunning, isn't
it? Wonderful.
Yeah.
They're all, the King's Guard are going past us as we speak at the Rotherhams, and they look absolutely magnificent. Those horses are groomed to within an inch of their life. They look so shiny. Look at them. Oh, my goodness. So that... just to explain to everyone, we were talking about redundancy. So those of you that don't know what that's all about, it's actually on boats like these that are intended to go exploring for a long way and be in the middle of nowhere and not have anybody available to fix them or and so on and so forth. They'll have several of everything on board so that if one of them goes wrong, then another one is available to kick in. So it might have 2 to 3 generators. It might have extra steering systems. It might have extra, engines. So it's water makers, all those sorts of things.
Yeah. So
that's what we're talking about with redundancy, folks, for those that aren't aware of that term that we use very regularly in the boating industry. So you've started to look at building these incredible yachts, boats, whatever we want to call it, because it's actually a very different boat in many ways. So you must have had to bring a whole team together to do that. You've obviously got skills in certain areas, but creating a boat like that includes an incredible amount of skill. So how did you go about, that's a big task. How did you go about starting that?
Yeah, I think it's like every idea starts with hope and ambition, doesn't it? And the ambition came from a trip with my eldest son, and we were in Greenland, sat on an ice cap, watching this extraordinary amount of water flow off the ice cap, and we were like, that's pretty mental to see what's going on there.
Yeah,
and we were just saying, wouldn't it be amazing to design a platform that felt really comfortable here, irrespective of whether it went to the Med and Saint-Tropez, but felt really comfortable here with all the sort of sea states and things like that. So that was the ambition. And then the hope was that you could sort of find the right people to help you build it. And that journey, that never stops with the business. You're always looking for people, and, there's, because your ambition continually grows and changes and things like that. But we were super lucky. We met a few, the sort of Lymington crowd initially, and just sort of,
which were a nice bunch.
Yeah, which were great. And we started talking to them about, we've got this ambition to do this, and that, da, 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 da. And Tom and Rob Humphreys, who run Humphreys Yacht Design, who are just extraordinary, not only embraced the idea, but just were all over it And we met a lot of naval architects and, went through the route, but those guys were just extraordinary. And I love Rob. Well, I think they're both extraordinary, but I love Rob's approach because Rob studied as a product designer rather than a naval architect. And so naval architecture came later. So his aesthetic approach is sits very comfortably with me because, as a sculptor, I'm about form and structure. And so that works really well. And so we ended up with an extraordinary platform, and then we assembled a team around that. And the idea was to try and build a team that were, obviously exceptional engineers, great designers, and good creatives and project managers and things like that. And we took that team from lots of different industries. So from automotive, from marine, obviously. And then also brought a lot of the skills from the games industry. So one of the issues is how do you realize a vision? And it's the easiest way of realizing a vision is to show visuals. And so CGI played a big part in how we brought the thing to life and stuff. And, we've ended up with this, I don't quite know how we've lucked out so much, but this wonderful collection of people that includes, is really a really diverse mix. So sort of, multicultural team, really diverse and, pretty much balanced between sort of, men and women, multi-skill set. People who have climbed Everest, sailed around oceans, all sorts. So it's sort of like a Pandora's box of adventure. You open the lid and you're like, that's really fun.
Yeah, yeah.
So it makes getting up in the morning really cool. And then the ambition stays the same, which is how do you build the ultimate product for adventure? And ultimately what Arksen is at its most mundane, it's a sort of an engineering and design business. But really it's a sort of, I hope a cultural movement around a different way of living and, a different way of consuming these types of products. So that's really enticing.
Yeah.
And then it's about access to capital because, one of the, whether it's conservation and philanthropy or whether it's the marine industry, both of those have this like girth of funding. It's been almost impossible for sort of marine startups and things like that to raise money. So I think that's the other cycle the marine industry needs to go through is getting to a point where it's used to talking to capital so that, more of these ventures, more of these great ideas like Arksen, but others as well get funded. Yeah.
Before we go further into that, Arksen, the name, how did that come about?
Yeah. So there's the real story and then there's the sort of the marketing spin. So the real story is that we were in Greenland, as I said, and we were in Knud Rasmussen's house. He's got a house in Ilulissat. Well, he's dead now, but there's a museum. And you looked at all these Norwegian explorers and all their names like, Rasmussen and Nansen and stuff like that.
It's like going through IKEA.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. So I was like, the Sen, I quite like
the
that.
Schlurg.
Yeah, and then Ark was sort of like, oh, that's quite cool. But the reality is, we had hundreds of names and we all liked Arksen. We thought it was quite a clever name. And it had this sort of Nordic sort of vibe to it. It was inspired by being in Greenland at the time. But the reality is what firmed us up on it was the .com was available. So we could buy the domain. And that's the thing with all of these is you have to start with the .com.
Yeah,
right? So,
for sure. Yeah.
And then, as time travels on, you look at it. So now we sort of describe Arksen as, the Ark, which is the sort of, Noah's Ark, preservation of species, and then a sentinel. So it's sort of like the guardian over you that sits there. So it's the Ark and the sentinel. So you take which one you like. But
yeah, no, it's great. There's two really good stories. I like that. So you've created these incredible boat designs. We're going from 28 feet up to 85 feet with these babies.
Yeah.
What is your, why did you pick 28 to, well, you've got different series, haven't you? You've got the adventure series that goes from 28 to 45.
Yeah.
And then you've got the other ones that go up from there. What was your intention, firstly, with the adventure series? Who do you see buying those boats and enjoying those boats?
Yeah, so we've got three series. So we've got the Discovery series, which is our smallest boats. They're ribs, essentially.
Oh, I didn't know about those. Okay, awesome.
So they're sort of adventure ribs. So the clientele for those are sort of families, day trippers, fishermen, people that, divers, people that want a sort of a high performance, rugged rib that can go off. And
I love a rib.
Yeah, same. And there's something, going back to Jacques Cousteau, he always had a good rib, right?
Yeah,
he always had his zodiacs.
Yes.
So there's a real romanticism about a great rib. So looking again, these are, pretty modern vessels, but they're inspired by that heritage as well.
Yeah.
So the ribs, they're a offshore design, long range, very capable.
Aluminium hull.
Some are aluminium.
Yeah.
But the production ones will be a GLP hull using a bioflax and stuff like that. So it's interesting with composites because we've pushed quite hard the other way into aluminium. So every other boat that we do is aluminium. But with the smaller boats, there's some really interesting opportunities to start looking at how you bring more of the circular economy into that market. Because so far, we've ended up building tons and tons of plastic boats, but they're very, very difficult to recycle at the end of life.
Yeah.
So it's interesting for us to look at that as a problem to try and solve. And the Discovery series is part inspired by solving that problem and part inspired by, let's have a really good, I wouldn't want to say entry level, but let's have a really good on-ramp into into Arksen's world.
Yeah.
And then the Adventure series.
Before we leave those, where are they going to be built? And
so we bought a yard in the UK about a year and a half ago in Itchenor. So that's they're produced
in where?
Near Chichester.
Chichester. Is that where the footballers are and all that sort of thing? Chichester. Oh, have I got that wrong?
What's that?
Chichester. Is that the footballers area and all that sort of thing? Oh, that's Cheshire. Yes, I knew I'd got it wrong. So Chichester's where? Where is that?
That's not a million miles from Southampton.
Oh, okay.
It's down that
all right,
sort of neck.
So we're water-ish.
Yeah. It's
right.
It's on the water.
Yeah,
it's
unlike Fairline that decided to build in the middle of England. Okay, so you're nearish to water for that.
Yeah, that's on the water.
You've actually bought a yard.
Yeah.
That's exciting.
Yeah. No, it's great.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it just gives us the opportunity to do a lot more R&D much more quickly, and then obviously produce that series of boats. So that's the Discovery series, and the facility.
And they have outboards.
Yeah, they're out. There is an inboard version, but we've announced a partnership with Garmin. We've got a couple of other big partnerships to announce, and they'll be primarily outboards.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. So then the next series is the Adventure series, and that's sort of takes all the spirit of the larger boats. So aluminium, 70% recycled content. So we use a material called Nordal, which is a very expensive marine grade aluminium.
Okay.
But it's got the benefit of being, predominantly recycled day one. So sort of fits with the ethos of working within the confines of a circular economy. And the marine industry is very hard to do. It's very hard to sort of justify working within a circular economy in the marine industry because you pay a premium for every sustainable product. And that's one of the reasons capital needs to become better is that at the moment, sustainability is a premium. It's a luxury product and it should just be the norm, right? And we need to get to that. But over time with government legislation and things like that, we'll get there. But
I think the consumer will drive it as well because we want our products to be responsible, don't we? So
yeah, we do. Particularly leisure products. It's quite hard if you're sort of, bobbling around on something that's, fundamentally unsustainable. It may be fine for people my age, but for our kids, there's a sort of, there's a dilemma.
Yes.
For them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And so we're inheriting that dilemma. I'm sure we would have all carried on very happily unless our kids were holding us to account. So anyway, the Discovery series are the ribs, and they go from 6 meters up to 10. And then the Adventure series is a sort of cabin boat, aluminium cabin boat, ideal for day trips, weekends away, 400 or 500 mile range, depending on the size of the boat. just an exceptional product to go off if you're going off for a few days and you want, a boat that you can sleep on and do a bit of cooking on and dive off the side of, and that can do sort of 25, 30 knots. I think they're amazing for that. And the fact that they're built from aluminium just gives you this robustness. So they're, a bit heavier than maybe a JRP equivalent. They feel really strong. So when you're in a big sea, you're not sort of going, there's lots of doors rattling or things like that. So I think they're a really wonderful product, and they are inspired by the engineering maps that we have for the large boats, but within a much smaller envelope.
Yeah, and those, what sort of hull design did you decide to go for? I mean, is it designed for a heavy sea, or is it designed for lake and river? Or what did you decide to go with there? Yeah,
it's designed for sort of offshore use. So it's a relatively narrow, high performance hull, and it's pretty fine at the bow, good in a sea state. So it's been designed. It's got quite a wide operational sort of envelope or window, if you like, but it's if you take like the Solent chop, which is not a particularly lovely.
There's a bit of a washing machine down there, isn't it?
Yeah. So that's a really good testing ground for these types of boat, because you've got short and long waves. You've got sort of wind over tide. So we've used that sea area as a place to experiment and design these hulls.
And you've done with the interior design, by the way, very nice interior design. You've gone with that new approach to, because for years lots of boats were built with you have to put all these covers on afterwards and all this rubbish. You've gone with the sort of very structured cabin that you just sort of shut the door and go, which is so much easier for those of us to enjoy it.
I mean, I think it's interesting. So as a sort of a lifelong sailor, I've spent a huge amount of time outside on deck. And it was interesting when the kids were growing up. The kids were really keen just to be inside, because like in Greece it's like 40 degrees, and so our desire just to be outdoors all day, I think, is still there. But actually, at sea in the sun, it's pretty difficult. So I think you're building cabin boats that give you the opportunity to hide from the sun and protect yourself from wind and rain. It's just a really interesting experience, and it's different to sailing, but it's there's something. It feels like as I've got older, it's like, oh, this is great.
Yeah, absolutely. And you got so many. You got visual.
It's got 360. 360 degree vision, and it's, as you said, the interiors are really nicely appointed, and it feels like when you're in them. Sophie and I went off for a weekend in one last weekend, I think, and it was just super fun. Went to Buckler's Hard, went to the pub, a few pints. It's great.
Yeah. It's not right. It's all right, that boating lark, isn't it?
It's not bad at all. It's not bad at all. It's why we're all here, isn't it?
Well, exactly.
Fundamentally, it's about the lifestyle we want to lead, and we spend so much of our time on sort of doing emails and trying to get businesses working and things like that. So it's actually really lovely to just get some time to go and enjoy them.
Absolutely, yeah. Okay, so you've got that Adventure series.
Yeah.
The next series.
So then the Explorer series. I mean, they're really designed to be sort of class-leading explorer vessels, so the ultimate explorer vessels that you can find within those size ranges. And they go from 65 up to 85. There are custom designs much larger than that, but we don't they're not sort of production boats. So production boats, 85 foot and down. The 85 is, as I said, even though I say it myself, it's a real triumph of engineering. And I'm not the engineer, but the engineering team have come from the commercial world. So they've built hundreds of commercial vessels. So it's got all of the engineering excellence that goes with a vessel that needs to operate constantly. And just things like, the HVAC system is extraordinary. It's got sort of multiple forms of heat recovery, cool air recovery. That's all recycled around, to heat water, to, go into the refrigeration system and stuff. So there's everywhere you look at on that boat, there's energy recovery systems that have been put in place. And then, as we talked about earlier, huge amounts of redundancy baked in. The vessel that we're just launching at the moment, that's a full hybrid system, 7,500 mile range, multiple forms of stabilization, so fins and gyros, and these things called flopper stoppers, which are these sort of so what's that? Which are these sort of great big arms that come out, and they give you 60% roll reduction at zero energy. So they're just like genius, right? So why hasn't every boat got those?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So no energy. It's got big solar arrays. It's got sort of 15 to 20 hours of silent running. But what's extraordinary about these boats ultimately is, given their size, having things like recovery from capsize in a motorboat at that scale, almost unheard of.
Yeah.
So, the ambition behind those boats was to try and create something you could sort of, if you needed to, drive up a beach, so you can, ground them out. So if you need to change the propellers, or you bash something, or you want to just clean the bottom, you can just drive it up a beach. So the ambition was to be able to create this platform that could go anywhere in the world.
Yeah.
That would be really, really comfortable inside and feel sort of luxurious and nurturing, and go back to that Sentinel, the Ark and the Sentinel. It's like, I feel really strong in here, and I feel sort of calm and collected, and I feel I'm prepared for all the adventures that are going to come. So there's a really nice emotive thing around the sort of design briefs for them. And then the exteriors are really rugged. So we don't paint the boats; they're bare aluminium.
Okay.
They're lacquered. We don't see the point in putting several tons of filler and then several tons of paint on these things just so they look great in the marina. I'm much more interested in, are they ultimately the most capable boats that we can create? And I'm sure some will be painted in the future. But, again, it's just looking at the circular economy. As soon as you start putting filler and paint on these things, they're less recyclable than if they're just bare aluminium.
And you've got to do it again at some point.
And you have to keep doing it. You have to keep doing it. But it's not, the argument's not really about whether you should or you shouldn't. I think it's just for these types of boats, which are designed to be off-grid, used a lot, there's no need to paint them. And I think that's where how we look at this industry is like, what's the sort of functional need of the product, and how do you design from there? So redundancy is key because they're off-grid. 3 months autonomy at sea, so food storage and things like that, is key because, again, they're off-grid. Aluminium is really, probably the best material to use because A, it's lightweight, but B, you can fix it pretty much anywhere. So that you can weld stuff on using onboard welders and stuff like that. And then, trying to bring as much new technology into them as possible. So whether it's comms packages or whether it's the full hybrid system. So you're trying to push the envelope of, can you create super efficient hulls, really lightweight? Can you pack them with hybrid technology so that, if you want to go into the fjords of, say, Norway, you can do so and be compliant with MARPOL so that you can run silently. And I think that's what's so interesting about this industry is it's right at the beginning of a journey around these new forms of propulsion, new energy forms, and well, not new energy forms, but the adoption of things like hydrogen fuel cells and stuff like that. So there's a lot of really cool stuff.
Yeah, it's really cool at the moment. I've just done some great interviews with engine manufacturers, Suzuki and Mercury and Yamaha, talking about all of their different things that they're doing. And they're all taking completely different approaches and because boating cannot be solved to decarbonize boating. It's not one solution. We've got to come up with a whole bunch of different ones for the different types of boats that we have and the different uses we have. So
yeah, for sure.
It's fascinating.
I think it's, we've got some investments in a electric motor company that does sort of outboards called Rad Propulsion, which are the really awesome team. And I think it just depends on the operating window of the vessel, doesn't it? So it's very hard to have full electric if you want 6,000 mile range, or sort of impossible. Today.
Yeah. Well, plus if it's sitting in Australia, we make a lot of our electricity with coal, so that's kind of pointless, right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
So you've got to look at where it lives as well and how the energy is made there and all those sorts of things. So it's actually a much bigger picture than you think it is. And so, these HVO fuels and things like that, they're absolutely amazing in
extraordinary.
Getting into that as well.
And so you have to feel hopeful, right?
Yeah. And what's interesting is the industry is actually doing a lot. Probably not talking about it enough, but they are actually going, okay, we need to get onto this. Otherwise, we're going to get the situation where we're going to be legislated into it, and it's not going to necessarily be the right solution because the people that are creating the legislation aren't knowledgeable enough to know what we actually need. So it's a fascinating space at the moment. So all right, so let's talk about that propulsion system for a moment if we can, because I know our listeners will be interested in that. Which path did you go down in terms of engine brand or with that?
So we spent probably a year, and this is going back a while now, so obviously these projects take quite a long time to come to life. So we looked at pretty much the whole market, all of the major sort of manufacturers, and we worked with a Dutch company called Praxis Automation, who are not a huge company, but they have focused a lot on the commercial sector. And they had the designs for a serial hybrid system that we thought was really clever. So it's a fully integrated platform. So what tends to happen, what has tended to happen, is you buy the motor from somebody, you buy the battery management system software from somebody, you buy the control panels from somebody else, and then you buy a bunch of generators, and then you have a bunch of chip heads trying to figure out how it all works together. Yeah. And then, there are delays and stuff. So we wanted to find an organization that would work holistically with us to create a common platform that we could brand as Arksen and use as Arksen. So I think it's a really, what we've got, I think, is a really brilliant platform. So in the next vessel that's coming out, it's got about 170 kilowatt hours of batteries. So it's not huge, but that's enough. If the hotel load is managed, that's enough to give you somewhere in the region of, 12 miles out, 12 miles back. So you can, go up and down a fjord or something like that just on electric motors. And I just think that experience of being able to pull out of a harbour without running engines is really, for the sailors amongst us, that feels, that's appropriate. That feels great. And then it runs 3 marine grade Hyundai generators. And the beauty of that approach is that the generators can be tuned to run optimal speeds. So they're high RPM, optimal efficiency. You'll never get 100% efficiency, but they're designed to run at their optimal RPM. What's beautiful about that whole hybrid package is, from a sound perspective, each generator is fully sound insulated, and the motors are very silent. And then the engine room is completely soundproofed as well. So when you're on board, it's like being on a sailing boat. It doesn't feel like you're on a motor yacht. So the decibel target, I think, was like 7 decibels outside of the engine room, and we'll see where we've got to. But it should be, it should feel pretty extraordinary. Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah. So it's a great system, really good hybrid system. And I think every boat will be built at some point to be hybrid or full hybrid.
It'll be interesting to see what happens. Yeah. In the meantime, we've also got to look after the current fleet because there's so many of them. So
for sure.
Yeah. So we're going to continue that interview in a second episode of the Boat Princess podcast. So that will be the one following this one. So we thought we'd spread it over 2 episodes for you. Thanks so much for listening, everyone. It's always great to have your ears on board. I really appreciate it. And I'll see you on the water soon. Did you know that you can follow me on Instagram, and I'll be doing boat reviews and also giving you some fantastic maintenance and lifestyle tips for your boating lifestyle. You can follow me on Instagram at The Boat Princess, or you can follow me on LinkedIn as Nikki Vaux, The Boat Princess. Vaux, by the way, is spelled V-A-U-X.